Hello team, welcome to InfoSec Train. So today we'll be discussing about the Domain 2 updates for the CCSP new exam, that is for the cloud data security. I'm Krish. For more information, you can visit my LinkedIn profile. So team, the as I discussed in the previous videos, so the CCSP exam is basically going to have a lot of changes starting from this August 2022. And in domain 2, we have not much having some changes, but still these are the key topics which I feel that in domain 2 we have some changes is going to happen. One is about the data flows, and then one is about the certificate management. Then we have a new topic called as a semi-structured data, and we have a data location. So some of those topics are already there in the previous curriculums and all, but still in this curriculum they have specifically mentioned about the topics. That's all. So first of all, we have something called as a data flow. So it's not a big deal because whatever things we have discussed in the previous version of the CCSP exams. So the same thing like data dispersion, cloud data lifecycle, and the same thing is what we call as data flow only. So how the data is basically flowing from one location to another, maybe from on-premises to cloud, or basically from one particular cloud to another cloud platform. So how the actual data flow happens, or how I'm sharing my data or processing my data or using my data. So the whole data flow is basically just they have specified a word called as data flow, and it's completely aligned with the whatever things we discussed in the data dispersion and data lifecycle. And the next topic is pretty much new in this examination called as a certificate management, where we have something called as a digital certificates. See, when you say certificate management, or specifically we can say X509 certificate management, it is what we can say as an activity of monitoring, facilitating, and executing every certificate process necessary for a uninterrupted network operations. Like for example, let's say now we purchase a certificate, then we actually deploy it, we keep on monitoring it, we renew it, we replace with the new certificates. That process is what we call as a certificate management, right? So I'll give an example. Now we have a word called as like we all know about the thing called as a SSL or TLS certificate. So basically, who is basically giving you the certificate? So this particular certificate is given by something called as a CA, or certificate authority. Okay, especially the certificate management is always an essential component of the network PKI, or what we can say as a public key infrastructure. So in essence, it can act as the digital identity of a network endpoint. Like for example, let's say now you are calling a domain. So basically what happens when you call a domain, your website or your browser is actually trusting the domain by verifying the certificate. So commonly what we have is we have something called as a public certificates, right? So that means it is issued by the public certificate authorities. It's actually a body that issue the certificate to the clients, right? So basically what happens, if there is a certificate which is not issued by a proper certificate authority, is actually not considered dubious, or basically we can say it can be mistrusted by the browsers. So that's about the certificate management. Even if we have not discussed this in the previous version of CCSP, now in the new version they have specifically mentioned this point called as a digital certificates. And the next new topic which I have seen in the exam is that team we have something called as a semi-structured data. And we have already discussed about this structured data and unstructured data in the previous version of the CCSP also. But in this new version, they have added one more thing called as a semi-structured data. So I'll give an example. So we have a word called as a structured data, right? So what is structured data? Like the data which we store in some kind of a database, like we have a data which is properly stored in a row and column format. That is what we call as a structured data. Like we have a properly organized row or of column, like we can say a tabular format is what we call as a structured data. And what is an unstructured data? When you talk about unstructured data, it's actually the data which we store in without a proper schema, or without a proper format, or without a proper order, is what we call as unstructured data. I can give an example. Now let's say we have a data which I am storing in the AWS S3 or blob containers, etc. is example for unstructured data. Like any files or data which we store is what we call as a unstructured data. But at the same time, we have one more thing which is basically called as a semi-structured data. So what is semi-structured data? The data which basically don't have an exact structure or a tabular format like the structured data, but definitely have a proper order is what we call as a semi-structured data. So basically it's not completely structured, and it's not unstructured. Like for example, let's say you're writing a JSON code, or if you have a HTML code, if you have a predefined XML documents, and all these things are basically, examples of a semi-structured data. Like I can give an example. Now you basically have a JSON code where you basically open a curly bracket, you close a curly bracket. So there is a structure. There is a predefined, like, you start HTML with the HTML code, HTML, and you end with a slash HTML. Like this, you have a predefined code. So that is actually what we call a semi-structured data. And all these things are basically something which is aligned with the data classification and discovery. So this is a very important topic called as semi-structured data. And one more topic I have seen in the exam is that team we have something called as a data location. So what is the data location? See, that is something which we have already discussed in the previous domains also, but in this particular new curriculum, they have specifically mentioned that word called as data location. But when you say data location, what do you mean by that? So we must always keep in mind that where our data resides. When you go to the cloud platform, see, cloud is a global offering, and you know that the data can basically copy or replicate from one location to another, move from one location to another. So to ensure that we have a proper compliance, we have a proper regulatory compliance status, we have to ensure there is a proper assurance of the location and all. We must always make sure where our data resides in the cloud platform, or how this data can be properly processed and all. So location plays a very important role. So in fact, this is something which we discuss in the domain 2, then we discuss this same in domain 6, domain 5, and all these things. So that is something which is they have specifically mentioned as a part of this domain 2. So this is what I felt like, they have made some additions in the domain 2. So in the next video, we'll be discussing about the updates coming to the domain 3 of the CCSP examination. Thank you so much, team. See you in the next video. Bye-bye.